Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about what it's like to be trapped in a cult. Not, like, generally. We're going to talk about me, I'm trapped in the cult. See, I'm currently a Jehovah's Witness, have been for almost 30 years, and until quite recently, I was what witnesses call exemplary, meaning I did a lot of stuff for the organization and was deemed by the elders to be a good example for other witnesses to follow. I was a ministerial servant for nearly a decade. I served in the foreign language field, I served as a pioneer, I worked on RBC and LDC projects, including the construction of Witness's new world headquarters, Warwick. I always loved the congregations I served in. I've had nothing but good experiences with elders until recently. Never been offended by brother so-and-so, and yet, I'm here, making this YouTube video. So what's the deal with that? The deal is, I no longer believe in any of the witnesses' claims. In the XJW community, we call this being physically in, mentally out. Beyond simply not believing, I'm actually quite certain that witnesses are a high control group. But being a high control group that uses shunning to highly control people, leaving would mean losing everything. My family, my friends, pretty much everyone I've ever known, which is why instead of seeing my, frankly, very attractive face, you're seeing whatever I decided to put on the screen here. So this is definitively not a video about escaping a cult, because I haven't, although most of the important people in my life know where I stand. But I'm making this video because it seems like every day I see more and more stories from people, especially young people.
Young ones.
Who are in this exact same situation, stuck in some way. And hopefully by telling my story, or this most recent part of the constantly evolving story, I can be, I don't know, some source of encouragement, solidarity, something helpful, hopefully. Now, I'm not going to go through my whole life story. You know, fourth generation witness, I have a vast spiritual heritage, all that. Anonymity is pretty important here, given that if you search my real actual name in the search bar of Watchtower Online Library, you'll find life experiences written about an ancestor of mine, who I was named after. So suffice it to say, it's high stakes game being PIMO right now. But I loved the congregation I was in. My parents were very nice. School sucked. It's awkward being a witness in school. But after I graduated high school, I really hit the ground running spiritually. I felt like I'd made it out of Satan's dungeon unscathed. But as you may know or have heard from other people's stories, the process of the waking up to the fact that you're in a cult is a very lengthy one for most people, and it definitely was for me. And without providing some bullet points for myself, I tend to really ramble on. So for my own benefit, and in honor of all great clickbaity YouTubers before me, I'm going to break down the top 5 reasons I left Jehovah's Witnesses. Mentally. Anyway. So, number 5. Getting a lot from a little. And there's going to be a huge shift in tone here because I scripted out most of that introduction, and now this is just me freewheeling. So, be prepared for some tangents, and some anecdotes, some quips, some me cutting out this part. So I'm going to say, before getting into detail on any of these, a good preface would be that none of these things, except for maybe number 1, stay tuned for the big reveal, none of these things would have been things that I perceived as doubts at the time. In fact, they probably wouldn't have even been things that I was aware I had a problem with. It's kind of only with hindsight, looking back on the experience, can I kind of piece together, oh, these are kind of the things that I always had a problem with, and just shoved aside. You hear on ex-Mormon podcasts a lot the phrase, your shelf, like putting certain things on your shelf, doubts that you have. Like, okay, I'm not going to deal with that, I'm just going to put that up on the shelf. But eventually, the shelf collapses. And I think that's a pretty good analogy, but to me, it's almost like, it's like a crack in the windshield, like a really tiny crack. Just some rock kind of skips up from the back of a pickup truck and nicks the windshield. And you just learn to not even deal with it, like it's maybe in your periphery. Every once in a while, you're like, oh yeah, that. I should probably get that fixed, but you don't because it's just a little one. But then eventually, it spreads. And if you don't take care of it, the windshield shatters. But it's good to wake up from a cult, so it's a windshield of evil that shatters and lets in the good. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Okay, so here's what I mean by getting a lot from a little. From a young age, I definitely would notice that when we would study books like the Revelation Climax book, in addition to noting the word climax in big letters at the front of a book I was reading, in the Revelation book, you're seeing these elaborate pictures, these incredible interpretations of these really esoteric prophecies. But then I would look at the scriptures and realize, like, oh, there's almost no hint that any of these interpretations are true. Like, just reading it, there's no way that you would come to the conclusion that the United Nations is in any way represented in the book of Revelation. I particularly noticed this with the book of Genesis, and really the foundational issue at the heart of witness teachings, which I plan on doing an episode on. Stay tuned again. The foundational issue being the sanctification of Jehovah's name. So the main tenet of witness faith is that in the Garden of Eden, when Satan tempted Eve, it wasn't just to tempt her and Adam, it was an affront to God's sovereignty. It was Satan saying, you don't need God. You are fit to rule yourselves. Do it my way, not God's way. And as retribution for this, God, instead of just destroying them, or starting over, or just forgiving them, would have been my choice, personally, he said, okay, Satan, if you think you're so great, you rule mankind for, all of human history so far. And this is all to prove that man is not fit to rule themselves, but in fact, Jehovah's way is the best. And so that really made sense to me as an explanation for why God allows suffering, right? It's like, okay, God is all-powerful, and he can stop suffering, and he will, and he'll undo all of the suffering that's happened with the resurrection and everything, but he's just temporarily allowing it. Okay. But then you read the Genesis account, there is absolutely no indication that any of that is true. This conversation where God is like, okay, you get to rule mankind for a while, that never happens. The word sin actually isn't brought up in the Genesis account at all, even though we talk about original sin quite a bit. So I think the way I would compartmentalize that in my brain was like, oh wow, well, it's a good thing we have the faithful and discreet slave to interpret these things, because I would have never got that. But a part of me did recognize, well, I really hope we're right, because if we're not, we're basing a lot on not a lot of information. And I think that goes into number 4, Jehovah's Witnesses in Bible prophecy. So Jehovah's Witnesses believe that most of human history and most of the prophecies in the Bible are actually really about them when you really think about it. Everything is through this lens of Jehovah's sovereignty. One of the key ways that God is going to restore the sanctity of his name and his kingdom is through Jehovah's Witnesses. therefore were really, really important, right? So this was something that I wasn't aware of for much of my, like, really young life, but I want to say when I was, like, 12 or 13, in no way am I going to fact-check this. The DVD series came out. It was, like, a 2-part DVD released 2 years apart at different conventions, and it was essentially a history of Jehovah's Witnesses. There was, like, dramatic recreations of key scenes in witness history with, like, a hot young Charles Taze Russell. And prior to this point, I had never really engaged with the history of the organization much. You know, things would be talked about in the Watchtower occasionally, but the Proclaimer's book was the only real history book that existed at the time, and it's massive. The God's Kingdom Rules book hadn't come out yet. So this was the first time that I was aware that, yeah, we really think that a lot of Bible prophecies apply to us. And the thing that really got me was this notion that, you know, the arrest of certain brothers in 1917 and then their release in 1919, that was a fulfillment of the prophecy of, you know, being free of Babylon the Great, and that Christ invisibly appointed the organization in 1919, and the release from prison was kind of a way of showing this blessing, like that stuff. I was watching it thinking, that seems like a stretch. I don't know about that. And that was a conscious thought. It was like a rock that hit the windshield that, like, spikes your adrenaline. You're like, oh, whoa, where did that thing come from? But then, you know, you just let it slide into your periphery and you just don't really think about it. You train yourself to not think as a witness, and it's hard to get, you know, physically and mentally in witnesses to see this. The part of the training that you get, part of learning to be a witness, is learning to indoctrinate yourself and learning to stop critical thoughts, learning to cope with them and to dismiss them as personal failings. So if you don't understand a doctrine, that's kind of on you, you know. You have to pray for patience and understanding, but it would be a flaw for someone to not only have a problem with the doctrine, but dwell on it, challenge it, and say something about it. So I just stopped thinking about it. And, you know, every time the subject of 1914 and stuff would come up, that felt a little bit more legit because there seemed to be math involved, and Daniel, and, you know, you hear somebody describe it, and you're like, okay. I've always been horrible at math, and I struggle with timelines, just like knowing what events in history happened when. I guess I'm saying I'm a dumb person who doesn't know what numbers are or how they work. But I guess I just kind of took it on faith that, like, yeah, there's math involved there. I'm bad at math. I'm sure they know what they're talking about. So the 1914 thing didn't really stand out to me too much. But any time that witnesses were these key players in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, it struck me as we're giving ourselves a lot of credit here. As I'm, like, going through this, I'm realizing I think a big problem I had was self-importance of any kind. Now, I've always had really low self-esteem. In hindsight, probably a lot of that is the way that we're taught to think about ourselves as witnesses. But I think part of it is also just, it's how I am. And so I was always uncomfortable when we talked ourselves up as an organization. It just always kind of made me a little bit uncomfortable. Like, it didn't make me uncomfortable when brothers and sisters in the congregation would say, oh man, this is why Jehovah's organization is so amazing, when it was like a personal expression of thanks. But when it was something like in the Watchtower, and there's an awareness that, like, okay, the people that ride the Watchtower are in the organization, so when they are talking about how great the organization is, it's kind of patting themselves on the back a little bit. And I think that that plays into number 3 JW Broadcasting and, like, videos generally. That is apparently what I wrote on the piece of paper I'm reading from. This was a long process because the current format of witness meetings, the way that media is so front and center in the organization, to the point where now, you know, the conventions for 2020 and 2021 are going to be digital. That stuff was a real slow burn. I want to say in 2012, we started slowly introducing videos into the meetings. And it was exciting at first because, if you've ever been a witness, you know that meetings are boring. Painfully so, sometimes. And conventions, you know, quadruply so, because they're way longer. So initially, this idea of like, oh, okay, we're gonna see a video in the midweek meeting, that's a fun change of pace. And then in 2013, that's when the New World Translation revision came out, and so that was really, really exciting, and for me, super effective. Really pulled me hardcore into the organization. You know, I mean, obviously, I was a true believer at this point, but it was just one of those moments that I felt like, oh, this is just a great moment in the history of this organization. Jehovah's blessing us. Look at this amazing translation of the Bible. So at first, this is all to say, the videos were really effective to me. And the 2013 one was interesting because that was the first time that we really saw the governing body front and center for an extended period of time on HD video. Not just giving talks, but kind of jabbing at each other. They'd make little jokes, and we're like, oh, okay, they're people just like us. Celebrities are just like us. And then sure enough, in 2014, JW Broadcasting was a thing. And that came out, the first broadcast came out at such a dark, terrible moment in my life. And it was just one of those things that I was like, this is Jehovah. This is exactly what I need. This is food at the proper time. I was in a really bad place. I had just experienced sexual abuse within the organization, which I won't get into because A, it actually didn't really play that much into my waking up process, and B, it is a certified bummer. I don't know, maybe I'll talk about it later. But yeah, I was in a pretty bad place, and you know, you can kind of go one of two ways in that situation, and I went way hardcore into the organization, like, yes, this broadcasting thing is where it's at, baby. So that specialness began to wear off, though, pretty quickly. One of the big things, I would say, was, yes, the infamous Tight Pants Tony talk.
Young fellas, because the older ones aren't doing much of it, thankfully. It's the metrosexual look. We've addressed that in the past. We've said things about it. But what's happened now, it's really caught on more. Now, metrosexual, that's the tight suit jacket and the tight pants, better known as tight pants. And they are tight, I mean tight, all the way down to the ankles. But like I've been telling others, and this is a fact, the homosexuals that are designing these clothes, they like you in tight pants. That's who likes it, not spiritual people.
So yeah, this annual meeting, you know, it's going along, and then old Anthony Morris 3, the turd, goes up and gives a completely unhinged homophobic rant, misogynist rant, any kind of negative thing. He threw it into the pot there and just stirred it up like a fucking witch stirring a cauldron. It was just awful. And it was really shocking. I mean, that was something that I wasn't like, oh my God, this might not be God's organization. You know, that thought didn't cross my mind, but I was like, this is not cool that this is allowed to happen. And a lot of people were really offended. You know, the homophobic stuff, spoiler alert, was quite a trigger for me. I always struggled with accepting our organization's stance on that stuff. But beyond that, it just seemed like such flimsy reasoning for all of the points he was saying. You know, this idea that there was a conspiracy in the fashion industry to make men more gay with their pants. You know, he said that the gays who design these pants, they want to see you in those tight pants. You know, I'm thinking, okay, let's accept that premise. Who else famously designs clothes in the fashion industry who might be attracted to men? Cis women, they might design clothes and also want to see men in those clothes. And also, like, if straight guys are buying the pants and wearing them, it isn't gay, because they're not doing gay things. You know, pants aren't sentient or capable of being homosexual. It was just crazy. It was so crazy. And the thing that really bugged me, actually, he talked about Spanx, which I don't think he knew what Spanx are. I think he meant yoga pants, but he really talked about Spanx. And then he talked about, you know, sisters, if you're looking at a brother as a potential mate and he's 23 years old and he's not a ministerial servant, that is bad news. Get him out of there. And it was so awkward for a lot of people in the audience. You know, I was a servant at this time, but I had a relative of mine who just got married to someone who was not yet a servant and was 23, but, you know, was doing a great job and they had a happy marriage. Like, who is this guy to say don't marry somebody because this arbitrary age and this arbitrary title are not in correspondence? Like, it just, it sucked. It really sucked. And I don't know why, but I fully expected an apology to come on the website. I mean, it was the talk of the town. There were people that walked out of the assembly. I was sitting in the very back because I was working in first aid, and first aid was right by the exit. People got pissed at that. And I was like, this was so inappropriate. It was so unhinged. There's no way they're not going to apologize for it. You know, this was the second craziest talk I'd ever heard. And you hear a lot of crazy talks as a witness. And the first craziest talk I ever heard, I don't know if you know this, but the public speakers, you know, who travel and give talks on Sunday, as I did many times, you're kind of graded. And if you don't do a good job, and in fact you do a bad job, you know, the congregation will call your home congregation and say, hey, this brother was spouting some nonsense from the platform. And in the case of the most crazy talk I ever heard, future content, ? Yeah, we called this congregation and we said this guy cannot be giving talks anymore. And sure enough, it was the last talk he ever gave. He was decrepitly old. It was a mercy talk killing. But of course, that apology never happened. There was no apology on the website. I thought maybe it would be addressed in a broadcast. Also, no. Brother Morris went on to host and firmly not acknowledge the tight pants talk. And it did click with me a little bit, and again, not something I would dwell on, not something I would have recognized as a doubt, but they're held to a different standard. You know, if you go and say some crazy nonsense from the platform on your public talk, you're going to be held accountable. The elders are going to yell at you. You're not going to be allowed to go out and give talks anymore. But who's going to yell at the governing body members? The other super old white guys who are capable of giving some pretty crazy talks themselves? I don't know. Maybe they'd say, hey, tone it down on the gay bashing next time. But I don't think that they're, you know, reprimanding Tony Morris. And so it did strike me that there was a disparity in the standard that we were being held to. The specialness of JW broadcasting also wore off to the point where instead of being something I was looking forward to every month and found super encouraging, it was something that I found I was kind of dreading. And I would watch it in chunks, or maybe I would just watch the talk. And I had a hard time understanding why that was at the time, or if I knew what it was, I wouldn't allow myself to dwell on it. There were a couple things. One kind of ties into a larger issue that I'm gonna now insert. This was now a top 6. You didn't know it, but now we're on 3, which is bad teaching, just poor, flimsy teaching skills. And you saw this a lot in the broadcast, from the governing body, from their helpers, from people in the writing committee, and that was really significant to me. Again, you're not a stranger to bad talks with flimsy reasoning when you're a witness. Talks on Sunday are very hit or miss. Your circuit assembly is going to be all local men, and maybe they're good speakers, maybe they're not. Conventions, same way. And bad teaching, by which I mean so many talks would start out with rudimentary definitions of words. Webster's dictionary defines.
Webster's dictionary defines? That's the Jim Belushi of speech openings. It accomplishes nothing, but everyone keeps using it and nobody understands why.
You would have sweeping generalizations made with no evidence to back them up. Things are worse than ever.
Things are worse than ever.
Jehovah's Witnesses are the happiest people on earth. I remember one speaker on the public address at a convention saying, Jehovah's Witnesses, we're the only people that smile anymore. You can't say that. It's not true. I see people smiling all the time who aren't witnesses, and isn't this supposed to appeal to the public? What a dumb thing to say. So I would get irritated with that kind of thing, and because I was able to give talks, I was like, okay, well maybe that'll be my focus, is trying to bring some good teaching in. And the same kind of poor reasoning you would see in the magazines, but I think it's easier to let your eyes glaze over monotonous words and not let them sink in. If you're not really taking in the words, you're not going to really think about them critically, and you're not going to really be bothered by them. And I think it's really easy to do that with the Watchtower. So I would notice it sometimes. I was always bothered by the fact that they would say, one researcher said the following, or to quote one scientist, but then they wouldn't say who the scientist was. That stuff bothered me. But in general, it was easy to dismiss because it was just easy not to really read the magazines too deeply. But when the governing body members, when one of Christ's brothers, who he has appointed to lead his people, is in HD saying words right in your face, and they're dumb and suck, it stands out more. So the kind of bad teaching that you would see in your home congregation was easy to dismiss because, well, that's just brother so-and-so. That's Bill. He works down in the mechanic shop. He's not a public speaker. He's just a humble guy, happens to be an elder or a servant. He's giving a talk. He's doing his best. It's easy to dismiss those things when you know the folks. And it's really the same with assemblies and maybe even conventions. You generally are going to know somebody giving a talk, right? Less easy to understand when it's somebody from the teaching committee who has been in this hyperbaric chamber, has been in this hermetically sealed bubble of Bethel for decades maybe. Their only job is to be good at teaching, and they're not. It's harder to swallow that, and it was definitely something I started to notice. Not just with the talks, but with the videos. And the videos were something, by videos I mean demonstrations and interviews. Interviews, probably not as much. The demos were really the ones that started to strike me as not just cringy, but manipulative. Again, demonstrations are nothing new. You've always had demos and the midweek meetings, at the assemblies and conventions. I've been a part of them, but it's different when it's this huge production with HD cameras and sets and actors and music trying very explicitly to elicit emotion. And it's also easy to kind of dismiss the cheesy, bad, simplistic dialogue in local productions of demos, right? It was always based on stuff given to you by the branch, But it was also easy to be like, hey, we're just a couple of folks at local congregation number 3. We don't know anything about putting on a show. Less easy to forgive that when it's this huge professional thing. And I understand that the actors are just, they're not really actors, although apparently some of them get sent to acting school, which, remember, when you see these bad videos, they are literally doing their best.
What is on your mind?
I can't believe the nerve that Ben has.
But it's not so much the acting, it was the teaching and the intent behind them. So, like, for example, one that really bothered me was a video that was about a young person. Most of the ones that bothered me were directed at young people. There's this one where there's a kid, he's a high schooler, and he has this girl asks him out or, like, asks to help him with homework or something really benign, and he freaks out, and he has this deep, dark inner monologue, like, oh, this is Satan tempting me. I do like this girl, but what am I going to do? I have to uphold Jehovah's standards. And it really stood out to me. It stood out to me because those were the kind of anxieties that I felt all the time as a witness in school. But I always just dismissed that as me being overly sensitive or me being overly anxious and internalizing stuff too much. Like, it probably isn't really a big deal, but I'm making it a big deal. But here are these videos saying, no, this is a big deal. If a girl asks you out, this is a moment of crisis for you. There should be sad piano music playing. You should immediately beseech God and beg for Holy Spirit to direct your dong in the downward position. I don't know. Like, it seems to confirm the worst feelings that you have as a witness as being valid. And that upset me. There were more videos that upset me even more, which leads us to number 2. I messed up the numbering at some point in this, and now I don't remember. Okay. Gerrit Losh's broadcast. I'll put the date of the broadcast on the screen because I don't remember it right now. Now, again, none of these things would have been hardcore doubts, but they definitely would have been things that I noticed and pushed aside. Pushed it in the periphery. Little did I know that the crack in the windshield was spreading. So at this point, I am now married and I'm still very newlywed, just 4 months or so into my marriage, and just cloud 9, things are going awesome. I'm a spiritual head. Everything is awesome. And then I see this broadcast, and I was at the Kingdom Hall, actually, because we would show it on the first Saturday of every month to older folks in the congregation who didn't have access to the internet or whatever. And he starts giving this talk about rumors. What if we hear rumors about the governing body? Now, here's where I do a frickin' sweet Hamilton helpless and dissatisfied rewind on you. At this point, years previously, I guess sometime in 2015 maybe, I had come across an apostate email. I got an email from an apostate. It was so shocking. Didn't know where it came from. Didn't understand, how they got my email or whatever. But it was horrible. It was like cartoonishly apostate, really, all caps angry stuff. So I didn't really read it. I'm scrolling through, my heart's pounding like, oh my God, I can't believe I received something like this. Not reading any of the information. And the last line of the video is like, hey, don't take my word for it. Here's Jeffrey Jackson talking about child abuse. I don't remember the wording, but I could see in the thumbnail this video of Jeffrey Jackson clearly in some kind of deposition setting. I couldn't tell what it was. And I didn't click on it. I deleted the email, blocked the person, told my parents about it, told everybody about it, because I was all proud, like, hey, look what a good JW I am. I got an apostate email and didn't even die. But secretly, I was like, what is that video? Like, the irony is, if that email had been sent to me just like 2 years prior, and somebody said, here's governing body member so-and-so doing something on camera, I'd be like, I don't know who the governing body is or what they look like. What, am I going to, sift through old life experiences and see if I can find one of their pictures? the increased visibility of the governing body through the broadcasts and stuff made me immediately recognize, whoa, that is Jeffrey Jackson, and he is definitely not in the JW Broadcasting studio. So that thumbnail image really stuck in my mind. Prayed about it. It went away. But every once in a while, usually when I heard something kind of, culty and weird at the meetings, I would flash to that thumbnail image and just wonder. I had no idea what the content of it would be or what it was. But the fact was, this is the first indication I had that there was information out there about the organization that was freely available for other people to watch whenever they wanted, and I didn't know about it. I was afraid to look at it, and I didn't know why. And I guess I told myself, it'll be edited and manipulated, and I don't know what it is. But it did bother me. I prayed about it. Eventually, the worries went away. And I didn't think about it, for years. So, anyway, cut to the Gerrit Losh's broadcast. And he says,
Today, rumors are occasionally being spread in electronic form about the faithful slave. This has caused some concern on the part of some brothers, especially when the reports are commenting on court cases where some in the organization were accused. Sometimes reference is made to certain quotes, and readers then think, how can a quote be a rumor? A quote can be taken out of context. Critical reports often give only part of a matter and leave out other aspects.
And, I'm sitting up in my seat like, holy crap, that's like that thing I got. That kind of bothers me sometimes. This is the answer to my prayer is, oh my God, look at Jehovah's spirit. If you wait on Jehovah, look what happens. And he says, well, if we see something like that, we certainly wouldn't want to spread it to anybody else.
Should I spread it and undermine the trust that others have in the slave or in representative of the branch office?
We wouldn't want to tell anybody about it. We wouldn't want to weaken their faith. Quotes can be taken out of context. Didn't address the fact that videos are kind of, I guess they can be taken out of context, but, And then he said,
avoid sensationalism by saying something like, can you believe what I heard about this matter, or this person, or that person, referring to a statement that may have appeared on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter? The spread of rumors is like wildfire that is hard to control. It spreads distrust and can undermine someone's faith. This is not to say that the slave is perfect and never makes mistakes, but Jehovah and Jesus trust the imperfect slave who cares for things to the best of his ability and with the best of motives. Shouldn't we then trust the imperfect slave as well?
Hey, Jesus and Jehovah trust us, so shouldn't you? And that was the beginning of the end for me. I sat back and was like, that's not right. That's not sound reasoning. That's evasive. It's weird. He explicitly brought up the thing like, hey, some people are being disturbed by things they're seeing on the internet. Ignore it. If you see it, don't tell anybody about it. And just trust us because God trusts us, okay? Which, by the way, we can't prove because this all is kind of invisible. And man, it really, really bothered me. And from then on out, I just had this sensation that, what if I'm being lied to? I would have no way of knowing. And so it would be a thing that would crop up sometimes. I would really struggle with it. I would pray about it. I would try to do research, and those feelings would subside for a time. But this went on for probably a year and a half of just me constantly suppressing these worries. Suddenly, all the videos, all the demonstrations seemed to be more manipulative than I had thought. At the 2018 convention, You had that horrible video where, it's like a demonstration where a woman is in a store and they're giving out like pride bracelets, and the sister's like, oh no thank you, and the woman behind her's like, I'm a Christian and we love the gay community and you are awful for not accepting this bracelet. And it was so crazy, painting, first of all, the idea that would ever happen. Somebody would say like, hey, no, you have to take the Livestrong bracelet. Nuts, that would never happen. And painting us out to be the marginalized ones, not the LGBTQ community, not their allies, but us. That bothered me. And so that was the last convention that I was even able to partially enjoy. Another year goes by. By the next convention, I'm miserable. I just actively am like, I don't know what is happening to me, but something seems wrong. Something seems false. I feel like I'm being manipulated. And I just sat there through the whole convention like, this is kind of crazy. Oh yeah, real quick, the previous convention that had the video with the bad bracelet ended with that Courage music video. And it's the one where, it's the Great Tribulation and witnesses are being chased through the forest by a SWAT team, and they all join together in this clearing, and Jesus draws back his bow and arrow. He gets the light arrows from the end of The Legend of Zelda and shoots all the bad men, and the witnesses are saved. And everybody's singing this song and just sobbing their eyes out, including my spouse. And I'm crying too because I'm watching this and realizing I don't connect with this at all. And in fact, this is crazy. Like, I had never seen, you would hear talks about the Great Tribulation. It would be described maybe in print, but seeing it visualized is really different. When you see what you're meant to think of the Great Tribulation as being, boy oh boy, it really struck me as crazy. So yeah, the next year I was just miserable, and it was just an awful year. I would be at work, and instead of working, I would just be scouring Watchtower Online Library, trying to find anything encouraging, or going on jw.org looking for encouraging articles, something to lift my spirits, praying constantly to be uplifted, to quiet these thoughts, to, I don't know, make them go away, to make me believe. And I remember praying, don't let me look at this stuff because I know I'll believe it. Which, you think about it, how nuts is that? Like, if it's so convincing that you'll definitely believe it, it probably is true. But, I was praying, I would be at work, I would have these meltdowns, I would just go in the bathroom and I'd just be sobbing, crying, praying, just like, what do I do? I didn't know how to articulate what I was feeling. It just, something felt wrong. The organization just wasn't clicking with me anymore. And eventually, what happened was, numero uno, LGBTQ rights. I've always been super into podcasts and YouTube. And podcasts are a really intimate medium. And so I would listen to, especially like comedy podcasts, like Comedy Bang Bang or Improv for Humans or Hollywood Handbook. I like all those. And you would hear queer creators on there too. And it wouldn't be like the point of the whole episode necessarily. It would just, maybe it would come out in conversation. And it was clear like these, like, it sounds so dumb to say this out loud, but hey, gay people, they're just like us. Like, they kind of just want to be accepted as fellow human beings. Watchtower would talk about gay propaganda, the gay agenda. It's like the agenda is just being allowed to exist. Like, it's really not that complicated. And so that became something that I would really pray about, like, oh, please let the organization change our minds on this, because I just instinctively knew. I was like, there's no way that God could possibly care about this. There's just no way. And I knew there was no way because there are gay Christians. And what are we going to say? Like, because if you follow this stuff through, I guess the time that I really connected with the witness interpretation of God was when we talked about love and compassion and understanding. Those were the things that resonated with me and made me feel encouraged and motivated to be a Christian. And if you follow Watchtower's logic through, if homosexuality is not allowed and is not going to be allowed in the new system, if it's this, error, this aberrant thing that was never supposed to happen, then gay people who are in love and married now, if they made it into the new system, they wouldn't love each other anymore. Because their love is invalid. They would be expected to grow apart or be forced to grow apart because they'd be quote unquote fixed. And it was just impossible to accept that that was true. So, of course, that was something I prayed about a lot and would try to do research on, but it was just so... It seemed like it was actually getting worse. Like, it was discussed more in the publications, and it was getting more ridiculous, to the point where there's, that stupid Caleb and Sophia video where, Sophia's like, hey, I have a student in my class who has gay parents. Is that a problem? And the mom's like, yeah, actually, they're going to die. So that was a really huge issue. And what started to happen, too, was in addition to just hearing queer voices, hearing diverse voices, I would watch YouTube videos. I was really interested in... I wasn't supposed to be, but I got interested in politics around 2016, like, many people like myself who were privileged enough to be ignorant. So it was just, it was shocking what was happening in the world. And particularly, if you're as terminally online as myself, it was impossible not to notice that there was this rise in, like, neo-Nazism, the alt-right. Like, what is happening? Why are there Nazis now? I grew up watching Star Wars and Indiana Jones. I thought we all agreed that that was bad. So I would watch YouTube videos by folks like Sean and H. Bomber Guy and Innuendo Studios breaking down their flawed logics, their recruitment tactics. A very influential video that got my brain churning was a video called The Alt-Right Playbook, How to Radicalize a Normie. And it basically outlines how the alt-right can take a relatively normal person and slowly indoctrinate them into these extremist beliefs. And I am not saying that witnesses are fascist at all. They are not. But fascism is a cult. And it was impossible not to see the correlation between the tactics being used. Another really big video that literally made me cry was H. Bomber Guy's video on flat earthers. And it's a comedic video. It's like a really funny but very logically presented takedown of flat earthers. But at the end, he gives this, like, impassioned plea.
So, of course, people are going to try and find something that helps them cope or seems like a solution. I mean, that's why you get cults. That's why you get Scientology. That's why you get Jordan Peterson supporters. Something is wrong, and we can all tell, and some people have arrived at a solution that doesn't really work, or at the very least makes them feel a little bit better. Some people feel really good, like they're really owning the Marxists by not eating their vegetables until they get scurvy. And then that's where the problems begin, isn't it? Because believing these things isn't a solution, and it's not really accurate about what the problems are.
Where he talked about, these folks are, like, they're able to recognize that there is something wrong with society. They're able to recognize that the government, in some ways, is not to be trusted. They're aware that things are wrong and that action should be taken, but instead of directing that energy in a good way towards positive change, they've believed in this totally different reality. And I broke down and I had to run in the bathroom and I just started sobbing. Because I thought, what if that's me? What if that's what this religion is? What if we're flat earthers? You know, it's not that different. We don't believe the earth is flat, but we do believe it's being ruled by Satan, invisibly pulling the strings of human history, and there's this, you know, grand chess match happening between Satan and God. The thing that that sealed the deal for me was discovering ContraPoints. ContraPoints, Natalie Wynn, absolutely incredible YouTuber. And, you know, Watchtower to this day, if you type in trans into the, like, search bar, you get 0 results. They have never acknowledged the existence of trans people. And so it was easy for me to do the same thing. But it was impossible not to feel something because I was aware that, you know, these are marginalized people. But I was just kind of consciously ignoring their struggle because, and I literally had this thought. I thought, well, I already had this issue with, you know, believing homosexuality is okay. What's going to happen if I start accepting the trans community? I had that conscious thought while looking at ContraPoint's YouTube page because her videos were recommended to me. And I heard myself think that, and I was like, that is insane. That is an insane thought to have. There is no danger in thinking that a marginalized group of people deserve to be treated like human beings. Like, what am I even saying? So I started to watch her videos, and it just shattered my reality. All the thinking about gender, about sexuality, is so binary in Jehovah's Witnesses. It is so black and white. It's in the Bible, therefore, blah, blah, blah. And hearing these nuanced conversations about gender, about sexuality, hearing the counterpoint, the ContraPoints to those arguments, you know, the way she's able to not only construct an argument, but deconstruct it from the opposing point of view, and then deconstruct the deconstruction, the complexity of this stuff that I had always seen it as binary, blew my mind. And after watching a few of her videos, I thought, if this is how God really feels, if he really feels like this is wrong, then I disagree with God. And even if this is the truth, I don't want to be associated with that God. That was the conscious thought I had. Eventually, I broke down, and I tried to tell my wife some. I didn't bring it up, but like the disfellowshipping arrangement, stuff like that. I had started to question some key doctrines, but again, at this point, I had done 0 research. I never did click on that, you know, thumbnail or anything. I'm purely going by reading Watchtower material and realizing, hey, wait a minute, this is manipulative. Not to, you know, plug on my own video, but, you know, that's the reason why I started JWFAQ. I was like, you know, I got to get back to basics with our beliefs, you know, and this is going to be really encouraging because it's aimed toward the public, so it's aimed to, you know, educate people who don't even know anything about witnesses. So I started reading the FAQ articles, and I was just shocked at how shoddy the reasoning was. Like, do Jehovah's Witnesses break apart families? You hear that a lot. You just hear detractors say it. You hear it out in the ministry, whatever. And I read it, excited to see what the reasoning would be, and it doesn't bring up disfellowshipping once. And I thought, well, that's clearly what people are talking about when they talk about witnesses breaking up families. They're talking about disfellowshipping. I mean, we have disfellowship people in my family. So that was a big wake-up call. And then, like, you know, the whole video on why witnesses are a cult, starting with that FAQ article, that was one of the articles that help wake me up because I'm worried. Oh my God, what if I'm in a cult? I see that this is the featured article on jw.org. I think maybe this is an answer to my prayers. And I read it, and it starts off by saying, well, hey, listen, we don't even really know what a cult is. Everybody has a different opinion on what a cult is. Who knows, man? Here are 2 common perceptions. And it was just clearly evasive. So anyway, eventually I try to articulate some of this to my wife. And it was shocking, and, it was really hard for her to hear. Many tears were had. But I said out loud the words. There are a couple things. I said, I'm afraid. I'm afraid because, I had realized, ironically, through another one of the videos, I never realized that you couldn't just leave. I didn't know that. I thought you would only be disfellowshipped and shunned if you were an unrepentant sinner. I didn't think there was any reason why you couldn't just say, hey, you know what, I'm actually just not going to be a witness anymore. But there was a video that showed exactly that. It was from the point of view of parents, obviously. Their son disassociated. I was shocked. I looked it up in the OD book as the video was playing at the convention, and sure enough, we treat disassociated ones just like disfellowship people. That was one of the moments where I realized I was trapped. I didn't have any way of escape. So I told her I was afraid. I described these things about disfellowshipping, about disassociation, about my feeling towards, the LGBTQ community, and through tears and just not even believing what I was saying. I mean, believing in the sense of, like, I can't believe that I'm saying this. I said, I don't know if I believe this anymore. And that was the first time I had said that out loud. It was the first time I had allowed that thought to even cross my mind consciously. It was always a fly that I swatted away. But I said it out loud. And, me and the wife patched things up. It was fine. But that night, she went to bed a little early. And I was sitting there on the couch, and I was like, you know what? I just said that I don't know if I believe in my religion anymore. I've got to do research. So, the first place I went, funny enough, was actually NPR, because I've been listening to Fresh Air with Terry Gross, a program on NPR, since I was born. It was always a tradition after school. It timed out, so that show would come on right as I was being picked up from school, and then the show would still be on, so we'd turn on the radio in the house and continue listening to the interview. It's just a great interview show, and there's a podcast version of it, so I listen to it every day. And one day, it was an interview with this author I'd never heard of, and the title of the episode was "A Jehovah's Witness Talks About Leaving Her Former Faith," or something like that. And I remember saying, damn it, you tell me I can't even listen to Terry Gross now? This thing I've listened to my entire life? And, I know this show. I know what a good interviewer she is. I know how well vetted the guests are. It's not just going to be a crackpot conspiracy. The first thing I did, I was too afraid to listen to it. I know that Fresh Air, they put transcripts of the interviews on their website. So I was like, well, if I just peeked at the transcript, maybe I'll be all right. And I looked at it. I kind of was speed reading. And it was just pretty benign. It really wasn't anything that audacious in it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of anticlimactic. And so then I went on Reddit. I was already a big user of Reddit. And I had seen the XJW Reddit recommended a couple times. In the AMA section once, there was a former circuit overseer. I used to go to the AMA subreddit, and I unsubscribed one day because one of the top things was, I'm a circuit overseer of Jehovah's Witnesses, or a former circuit overseer, ask me anything. So I didn't look at it, but I was aware that there was a community somewhere. So I looked on Reddit, and I started looking through just the titles of posts, and I was blown away, and immediately, the adrenaline is pounding, but there was also this sense of relief. I'm seeing these posts that are help, I'm PIMO, PIMO, what the heck does that mean? And I'm at the sound desk, ugh. Or, help, I'm PIMO, and I'm assigned to do a microphone tonight, and I just don't want to be here. And without even reading the explanation, like, I immediately was just, like, physically in, mentally out. Oh my god. So I started reading these posts of these physically in, mentally out people, and it was like getting a diagnosis to this unknown disease that you've been struggling with for years. It's like, oh my god, I'm not crazy. There is actually there's a thing. There's a name for what I'm going through. And I found just the existence of that acronym so comforting. And then I was like, oh, I should try to find that thumbnail, obviously. So I go on YouTube and I search for, like, Jeffrey Jackson deposition. Like, I didn't know what I was looking for. And for whatever reason, the first one of the first results was an XJW 5th video. It was an interview with a guy who used to write for the Wash, Shine, Awake magazines as a researcher. And I was like, okay, that's tempting. So I started watching it, and I can't describe how comforting it was and how safe I felt, because Fifth, he was so calm, cool, and collected. He's just cool in general because he's rad. But in those videos, there was no sensationalism. There wasn't my sarcasm that I now implement. He seemed like a brother. He seemed like a person that I would meet in the congregation. And the person he was interviewing was the same way. You just knew this. You knew this guy. You knew these guys. You'd met guys like this. And they still talked like witnesses. It's kind of a weird thing, but, like, there's a cadence to the way witnesses talk.
What is on your mind?
I can't believe the nerve that Ben has.
And they had that. And they even talked about things they liked about being a witness. This brother, I'll call him a brother, sure. Brother in the XJW community. He was talking about, privileges that he enjoyed, congregations he liked serving in. He was an elder and he enjoyed doing such and such. And sorry if you can hear my cat meowing in the background, by the way. The stereotype about bitter apostates who just want to tear down the organization and discourage people and lie was at least not universally true. From there on, I was able to find the Australian Royal Commission video, and it was game over. From there, there's no real going back after you see the Australian Royal Commission, seeing a governing body member flounder and flop sweat and twist the truth. Kind of a bad look, TBH. So, I'll speed through this last part, which is really, I went down the rabbit hole. It is inevitable. When you first wake up, all you want to consume, all you seemingly can physically consume is XJW stuff. So I devoured Crisis of Conscience very quickly, which, if you're not aware, is a tell-all book written by a former governing body member of Jehovah's Witnesses. It is just a knife to the ribs to the organization. It's devastating. Devoured all of XJW 5th's videos, absolutely devoured Lloyd Evans' videos on the John Cedars channel. And I want to shout out Lloyd Evans for the broadcast rebuttals, because that takes a lot of effort. He does a rebuttal for every month of JW broadcasting, and in addition to it just being an absolute monsoon of logical fallacies that a person would have to untangle, it was helpful for me tracking my own journey to be able to have this timeline of broadcasts and track my own waking up process in that way. Like going back through and realizing, oh, you know what? I did kind of subconsciously notice that, and here's this guy vocalizing it. I was especially affected by his Taking on Tony series. He has this series specifically taking on Tony, if that wasn't clear and needed to be clarified. Tony Morris, the tight pants governing body member. Well, he's not a tight pants governing body member. He despises tight pants to a degree where you wonder if he actually kind of loves tight pants. Does he just want to, like, power step down the runway in the tightest pants you've ever seen? But that was a governing body member who had always bothered me, and I'd always kind of fought my conscience on it. And so to be able to hear somebody pretty ruthlessly, but not in the stereotypical bitter apostate way, just logically pointing out how completely insane everything he's saying is, very cathartic. I'll also say that I sort of went through the stages of grief in a blender, like not in order. Like I started out with acceptance. I remember very cognitively thinking, thank God it's not true. Like, thank goodness I don't have to worry about impending Armageddon. And then I hopped to denial, like, well, you know, I'm on a path now to get disfellowshipped, and I'll probably lose all my friends and family, and maybe my marriage, but hey, I'm mentally awake now. And it is very exhilarating, because suddenly I can read anything I want. You know, I had never been able to read anything about evolution outside of high school biology. So suddenly I'm able to read science books that I would have avoided before, subconsciously knowing that it may cause my faith to waver in like an absolute literalistic reading of the Bible. And there's just this whole world of information about the history of the organization that's so fascinating. But that rabbit hole, you also have to pull yourself out of it, because eventually you know all the information, you've done all the research, you intellectually have consumed everything you logically can, but you're still doing it, and it's just now making you angry. Like, instead of enlightening you and informing you, it's just triggering this incredibly negative emotion. It starts making you bitter. And of course it does. It's one of the greatest tricks the organization pulls, is it tells you apostates are bitter. They're angry. And yeah, if you spend the majority of your life, thankfully I did not spend the majority of my life in the organization, but some people have. And if you spent any amount of your life, years, decades, half a century in the organization, and you find out that that thing that you not only believed in, but you fought for, that you gave up things for, you gave up an education, maybe you put off having kids, maybe you didn't pursue your dream job, any number of things, of course it makes you bitter, of course it makes you angry. But continuing down the rabbit hole can really fuel that anger in a super negative way. So I guess I'll get into the, I don't know, advice section. What you do about being PIMO. Stepping down from being a servant was harder than I thought it was going to be, not because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it, but because the elders in my family were weirdly pressuring me not to do it. I would think the elders would be like, oh, okay, yeah, if you have doubts about the organization, get out of here. But they were weirdly very willing to accommodate things. They were like, okay, well, we just won't give you talks about things you disagree with while you work these things out. So I had to fight for that. And then it gets really tough, because what I definitely realized is the reason why it took so long to wake up is because the organization keeps you busy. Even the most middle-of-the-line member of the congregation, your straightforward publisher, you have multiple meetings a week. You're supposed to read the Bible daily. You have to keep up with everything on the website, which is updated daily. You get monthly study editions of the Watchtower, bi-monthly Watchtower and Awakes now. You have to study for the meetings. You have to prepare comments that are 30 seconds or less, so you have to kind of time them. You have to watch videos to prepare for the meetings. You have to go out and service at least once a week, which means you have to set aside time to prepare your presentations. All these things are just the basics. And then if you're a pioneer, or you're a servant, or an elder, or God forbid, like a pioneer elder, or an MTS graduate or something, you don't have time to think. You don't have time to stop and consider things, being in a position where I just had to sit at the meetings and listen with nothing to distract myself with, aside from occasionally sneaking a read of Crisis of Conscience on my tablet, it is rough. It was very rough. And so I did that for, I want to say, I don't know, like 6 months, and then right where I was getting to the point where I was like, I don't know how to fade. I'm in a marriage. I have to support my spouse. It would be devastating to her if I don't go to the meetings. COVID broke out, and Zoom meetings became a thing, which made it way easier to fade. Like, I stopped going to meetings long before the elders noticed it. I think because I just, like, on the Zoom account that me and my wife use, my name's on there too, and, like, we rarely turn on the camera, but they just assumed I was there and just never checked. And so one day she logged in on her own account and didn't, like, add my name to it, and then they noticed. And then the ball started rolling on the family really coming down on me, elders badgering me, trying to do shepherding calls that I don't want to do, lots of comeback to Jehovah speeches, lots of gaslighting, soft shunning by members of my own family. That has been going on currently, and that has been challenging. But I think I'll wrap up here with, my goal was to be encouraging, and I don't think I've done that in any way, shape, or form. So, I've been now in a physically and mentally out state for over a year, and the marriage bit is really tough. There are a lot of people in my position where you're married to someone who is a strong believer, physically and mentally, and there are times where you settle into a routine and it becomes normal, and there are times when, for some reason, it's just really hard. Everything hits them, the reality of the situation, or everything hits you, and it becomes incredibly difficult, and you think, how can I possibly do this, blah, blah, blah. One thing that I found really helpful early on was forcing myself to actually go to therapy. Through my insurance, I got, like, several free therapy appointments a year. So I did that early on. One of the more helpful bits of advice that they gave me was that I'm not on a timetable. Like, this can all happen at my own pace. There's no ticking time bomb. Armageddon isn't really going to happen. You know, you base your life around this extreme sense of urgency, impending Armageddon. And when you wake up, there's this new impending Armageddon, which is the inevitable shunning, the inevitable loss of friends, family, maybe everything, maybe your job if you work for a witness. But it can all mostly happen at your own pace. There are going to be things that you can't control. You know, like one day my wife found In Search of Christian Freedom by Raymond Franz on my tablet. And that was something I was not ready for, nor was she, but we worked through it. So there's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be shocking things that you can't see coming, but you don't have to sprint to the exit. You can take your time. You also can sprint to the exit. Like, if you want to rip off the Band-Aid, if you just want to go out in a blaze of glory, you totally can do that. I will say, for me, I'm very glad that I didn't, because it is very tempting early on to say, you know what, I'm just going to write a letter, I'm going to disassociate. A friend of mine who is in the same situation told me that they wished that they would have used the time that they had to spend time with their family before the shunning started. You know, once you draw the line in the sand, and of course, you're not doing anything wrong, you're just stating that you don't believe in a religion anymore, shouldn't be a big deal. They're the ones who are going to be shunning you. You're not shunning them, but you know what's going to happen still, right? So, while you're physically and mentally out, you can use that time to spend time with your family that you know eventually you might not be able to get back. The other thing is, once you get past just the pure educational phase of your waking up process, it's totally cool to consume XJW content sometimes, but and I think it's good and necessary and cathartic because we all get those moments of like, oh my god, wait a minute, what if I'm wrong, or whatever. But it cannot be your main thing. You can't stay in the rabbit hole. But what I found helpful was redirecting that energy, that desire that I had to research and study and read things, redirecting that away from the organization into other things. So I got really into reading like Bible scholarship, like stuff by Old Testament and New Testament scholars. You think you know a lot of stuff about the Bible as a witness. In reality, what you know is this incredibly apologetic, literalistic interpretation of the Bible that has been debunked for like a century. So you don't know anything. Assume you know nothing. So reading scholarship is really interesting. Reading science books is really interesting. Reading history, just diving into ways to educate yourself about the world around you. Because whether you know it or not, you have looked at the world through a very specific lens.
You're a man looking at the world through a keyhole, and you've spent your whole life trying to widen that keyhole, to see more, to know more.
And really, you are under the impression that everything revolves around you, your organization, this impending destruction. Your perception of history has changed. Everything that ever happened in history, you're looking through this lens of, okay, well, how does this all build towards the sanctification of Jehovah's name, or whatever. Being PIMO, being in the situation that I am in now, is not a permanent solution, and I'm aware of that. This will not last forever. Eventually, I'm going to be showing my face on this channel and talking to you, and it might happen sooner rather than later. I don't know. But make goals for yourself. Keep yourself busy with healthy things. Find hobbies. You might not have really had time for hobbies. You might not know what your interests are. So find those. Experiment with stuff. Not necessarily, like, experiment with drugs, although do that. That seems fun. You know, experiment with, like, do I like doing pottery? Am I into sports? Like, hey, I have time to go to the gym now. Is that my thing? Like, find your thing, find your things, and start making friends. Start reaching out to people online. Join Facebook groups. Reach out to people that you went to high school with, that you had whatever version of friendship you were allowed to have in the organization. You know, start going to, it's tough right now with COVID and everything, but if there are online, like, Zoom events you can go to, you don't have to be gregarious and talk to everybody, but just being there, making that first step to just being in a new environment, that's super healthy. Anyway, it's hard, it sucks, but it gets better. There's a way out. You're in control. You're in control of your mind for the first time in your life. You may not be in control of all your circumstances. You never are. But for the first time in your life, you are fully cognizant of who you are, of reality, of your place in it. And a lot of that is realizing how little you know, is getting out of the mindset of, I have all the answers to life's big questions. There's not a tract that you can look to anymore that point to scriptures that will immediately solve your problems. And becoming comfortable with uncertainty is a weirdly liberating experience. That is all I care to say. I don't know. I ran out of steam there. I don't know what else to talk about. But like and subscribe. Probably in the future, the videos are going to be less me just rambling on and more scripted like the first video I did. But I don't know. If you like this, let me know. It is easier and harder at the same time. Easier to ramble on, harder to cut it all down. So, bye.